Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're really getting into something fascinating, how we protect our forests from insect pests, and how that whole approach has been, well, turned on its head.
Absolutely. We're looking at a world that's changing incredibly fast because of us. Really, global trade, climate change, how we use the land.
And to help us navigate this, we're diving into a specific paper.
That's right. It's a synthesis paper by Andrew M. Liebhold from 2012 called Forest Pest Management in a Changing World. Think of it as a kind of guide for people actually doing the work, the practitioners. It lays out 6 key areas for strategy.
So it's not just what to do, but it's got that historical perspective too, how we got here.
Exactly. It traces the evolution of forest entomology, the study of forest insects, from basically just identifying and killing bugs.
Which was the main focus for a long time.
Yeah.
Right, especially before World War II.
Oh, absolutely. Back then, it was pretty straightforward. Find the insect, see how much timber it's destroying, usually measured in board feet, and then, well, figure out how to kill it. Very timber-centric.
Then things changed dramatically after the war.
They really did. The chemical revolution hit. Suddenly, managers had these incredibly powerful insecticides, and crucially, they had aircraft to spread them over vast areas.
So it felt like, problem solved. We can just bomb the bugs into submission.
That was the feeling for a while, yeah, like we'd finally gained the upper hand. But that didn't last.
Because people started noticing other effects?
Precisely. By the 1960s, 70s, there's this growing societal awareness. Hang on, what are these chemicals doing to, human health, to the environment, bird populations?
And scientists were also rethinking things.
Yes, there was a parallel scientific shift. The realization dawned that insects, even the ones that kill trees like bark beetles, aren't just villains. They play roles in the ecosystem, like nutrient cycling or creating gaps that increase diversity.
So it wasn't just good guys versus bad guys anymore.
Not at all. And forestry itself was changing. It wasn't just about maximizing timber yield. People started valuing forests for recreation, for wildlife, just for their beauty, the non-market values.
Which makes managing pests way more complicated.
Infinitely more. You couldn't just nuke everything from orbit anymore. This led to the rise of integrated pest management, or IPM. The focus shifted to, well, being smarter surveillance, understanding the risks, using chemicals very selectively, if at all, and trying to work with natural processes.
But while all that was happening domestically, another huge factor emerged.
Globalization, yeah. That's arguably the biggest driver now. The sheer volume of international trade means we're moving species around the planet like never before.
And that leads to biological invasions.
Exactly. And this invasion crisis has fundamentally redirected the field. A huge part of forest pest management today isn't about controlling the pests already here. It's about trying desperately to prevent new ones from arriving and establishing.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Let's dig into Liebhold's specific advice. You mentioned 6 areas. What's the first big takeaway?
The first one is almost philosophical, but absolutely crucial. Liebhold states that forest pest problems are fundamentally people problems.
Right, the old, if a tree falls in the forest idea, but for bugs.
Kinda, yeah. He poses that question. Is an insect outbreak really a problem if it doesn't adversely affect resources that humans value? If insects are munching trees in a remote wilderness nobody visits and nobody plans to log, is it something we need to manage?
That really reframes it. It puts the focus on human values and human actions.
It does, and it connects directly to the causes, too. Think about it. Global trade, moving pests around, climate change, altering insect ranges, fire suppression, creating overly dense forests, even past logging practices. These are all human activities driving insect outbreaks.
And our response is also dictated by human concerns.
Absolutely. Take the gypsy moth example again. When aerial spraying happens, where is it usually concentrated?
Residential areas, right, where people live and property values are affected.
Exactly. Not necessarily deep in the commercial forest tracts. The management is driven by the human impact, economic, and amenity values. Sometimes public education is actually more effective than spraying, like helping homeowners understand the real risks from something like mountain pine beetle near their property.
Okay, that makes sense. People problems. What's the second piece of advice? This one sounds potentially controversial.
It was, and probably still is in some quarters. It's about the futility, generally speaking, of trying to terminate large regional outbreaks using pesticides.
Futility, that's a strong word. You mean it just doesn't work?
Pretty much, yeah. Decades of experience, often very expensive experience, have shown that While you might be able to achieve local short-term protection, like saving a specific park or a high-value
It
stand,
can't stop the whole regional wave.
you really can't shut down a massive outbreak that's already raging across hundreds or thousands of square kilometers just with spraying.
Why not? The paper gets into the mechanisms behind this failure.
It does, and it's fascinating ecology. There are two main concepts. First is what they call delayed effects, particularly regarding natural enemies.
Predators and parasites that eat the pest insect.
Right. The thing is, their populations usually respond to the pest population with a lag. They boom in the next generation after the pest numbers have already peaked. So by the time you see the really bad damage and decide to spray.
It's too late for the natural enemies to have controlled that peak generation anyway.
Exactly. And worse, spraying can actually backfire spectacularly.
How so?
Well, Liebhold cites studies on gypsy moth where spraying brought, that's Bacillus thuringiensis, a common bacterial insecticide, actually prevented a natural virus outbreak.
A virus that kills the moths.
A very effective one, yes. This virus usually kicks in when moth populations get really dense, but the spraying reduced the density just enough to stop the virus from spreading effectively.
So trying to kill them with brat actually saved them from the more lethal virus.
In a way, yes. It potentially prolonged the overall regional outbreak because the natural crash was averted by the intervention, the classic unintended consequence.
Okay, that's one factor. What's the second concept limiting large-scale suppression?
It's called spatial synchrony. This is the observation that outbreaks often rise and fall together over huge geographic areas, sometimes hundreds of kilometers wide.
Like they're all marching in lockstep.
Pretty much. It's often driven by large-scale weather patterns, think widespread drought stressing trees, or unusually warm winters allowing more insects to survive. This is sometimes called the Moran effect, where external environmental factors synchronize populations.
So if the whole region is experiencing an upswing because of favorable weather,
Then spraying your little patch of forest might knock the population down locally for that year, but the next year, the survivors, plus insects dispersing in from surrounding unsprayed areas, quickly bring the population right back up, entrained by that larger regional dynamic.
like trying to bail out one part of a swimming pool while the water level is rising everywhere else.
That's a great analogy. Your local efforts get swamped by the regional trend, so the money spent on widespread suppression often yields results that are basically invisible by the next year.
So the management implication is crystal clear.
Yeah. Focus suppression efforts strategically. Aim for short-term, local protection of high-value assets, a specific campground, a seed orchard, a residential area, but don't waste resources trying to stop the regional tide. It's about realistic goals.
Okay, if broad-scale chemistry is often futile, what about changing the forest itself? That brings us to silviculture, right?
Yeah.
Liebhold's third area.
Right. Silvicultural control. Basically, using forestry practices like thinning stands, changing species composition, or even strategic clear-cutting to make the forest less susceptible to pests in the first place.
It sounds like a more proactive, maybe more sustainable approach.
It can be, and it's had some real successes, particularly against bark beetles and wood borers. Thinning a dense stand, for example, can increase the vigor of the remaining trees. Healthier trees are often better able to defend themselves against attack using pitch or other defenses.
Makes sense. Stronger trees fight back better.
But, like everything in this field, it's not a simple fix. There are major hurdles.
Such as?
Well, cost is a big one. Thinning and other treatments can be expensive, and you need road access, which often isn't available in remote, rugged forest landscapes.
Practical limitations.
Exactly. And then there's the science itself. While the link between thinning and reduced bark beetle susceptibility is pretty well established, for other types of insects, like defoliators.
The ones that eat leaves.
Yeah. For those, some of the recommendations are based more on observed correlations like we notice fewer defoliators in stands with these characteristics rather than rigorous experiments proving cause and effect. So the scientific underpinning can be a bit shaky sometimes.
And what about diversity? Isn't the conventional wisdom that more diverse forests are more resistant to pests?
That's often suggested, and there's some research supporting it. But again, Liebhold points out that much of it is correlational. It's hard to definitively prove that diversity causes reduced pest problems in all cases. Plus, from a purely economic standpoint.
Monocultures are often easier to manage and more productive in the short term.
Right. Planting and harvesting a single species can be simpler and yield more fiber quickly. So there's this tension. Liebhold suggests focusing not just on diversity per se, but on managing for resilience.
Resilience meaning the ability to bounce back after a disturbance, like an outbreak.
Exactly. The capacity to return to something resembling its previous state, but defining and actually managing for resilience, especially when you throw in climate change and the constant threat of new invasive species, well, that gets incredibly complex.
Which loops us back to that huge issue, biological invasions, Liebhold's fourth point.
Yes, the invasion crisis. And the core message here, backed up by bioeconomic studies, is pretty stark. Prevention is vastly cheaper than cure.
Meaning it's far more cost-effective to stop pests from arriving in the first place than trying to manage them once they're established and spreading.
Exponentially more cost-effective. Once an invader is widespread, you're usually looking at perpetual, costly management, not eradication. So the focus has to be on the early stages of invasion: arrival, establishment, and spread.
Have we made progress on preventing arrival?
Some, yes. The ISPM 15 standard is a good example. It requires heat treatment or fumigation of solid woodpacking materials. Crates, pallets used in international trade. That's significantly reduced the arrival rate of wood-boring insects.
But pathways remain open.
Oh, definitely. With the sheer volume of global trade and travel, there's what scientists call high propagule pressure. Just lots and lots of opportunities for organisms to hitch a ride. Life plants, soil, containers. It's a huge challenge.
So if arrival prevention isn't foolproof, the next step is stopping establishment.
Right. This means early detection and rapid response. Finding new invaders when their populations are still small and localized, making eradication feasible. New Zealand is often held up as a model here. They have a really comprehensive surveillance system using things like pheromone traps, visual surveys, even aerial surveys, all designed to catch new arrivals quickly.
And if you do find an early infestation, how do you approach eradication? The paper mentions something called alley effects.
Ah, yes, alley effects. This is a really neat ecological principle. It's the phenomenon where, at very low population densities, the growth rate of the population actually decreases.
Why would that happen?
Several reasons. Individuals might have trouble finding mates. Group defenses against predators might fail. Social foraging might become inefficient. Basically, for some species, there's a minimum density needed to thrive.
So for eradication, you don't necessarily need to kill every single last individual.
Exactly. You just need to push the population below that critical alley threshold. Once it's below that density, intrinsic ecological factors take over, and the population is likely to dwindle towards extinction on its own because reproduction and survival rates plummet.
That seems like a much more achievable goal.
It can be. And management tactics like releasing sterile insects, using mating disruption pheromones, or mass trapping can actually intensify these alley effects at low densities, helping to push the population over the edge.
Okay, moving to the fifth point. This one seems tied directly to global forestry economics. Exotic tree plantations.
Yes. The widespread practice of planting non-native trees like Pinus radiata Monterey pine outside its native California range, especially in the southern hemisphere, New Zealand, Chile, Australia.
And they're planted because they grow incredibly fast and productively there, right?
They do. And a major reason why they're so productive is that they've temporarily escaped from the pests and diseases that evolved with them in their native range.
But Liebhold warns this escape is temporary.
That's the crucial and frankly alarming point. It's almost inevitable that some of those native pests will eventually catch up via global trade pathways.
Is there a key example of this?
The classic and devastating example is the Syrinx wood wasp, Syrinx noctilio. In its native Eurasia, it's a relatively minor pest of pines, but it got introduced to places like Australia, New Zealand, South America, South Africa.
Where those huge plantations of susceptible pines existed.
Exactly. And in those exotic pine monocultures, without its usual suite of natural enemies and competitors, Syrinx became a major tree killer, posing a massive threat to the entire forest products industry in those regions.
So the lesson is that reliance on exotic plantations creates a huge vulnerability.
A massive one. It means countries heavily invested in these plantations need to pour enormous resources into quarantine and biosecurity to try and prevent those co-evolved pests from ever arriving. Their economic model depends on maintaining that pest-free advantage, which is constantly under threat.
All right, that leads us to the final areas of strategy Liebhold covers: biological control and breeding-resistant trees.
Right, two related long-term approaches. Classical biological control is the idea of intentionally introducing natural enemies, predators, parasitoids, diseases from the pest's native range to control it in the invaded range.
The logic being that invasive pests often succeed because they left their enemies behind.
Precisely. It's about restoring some of that natural top-down regulation, and it can be incredibly successful. The winter moth in North America, for instance, was brought under control largely by the introduction of a specific parasitoid fly from Europe.
But biological control has risks, doesn't it? Introducing another non-native species.
That's the major concern, and it's a valid one. The big risk is that the introduced natural enemy might not be specific to the target pest. If it's a generalist, it could attack native non-target insects, potentially causing serious ecological harm.
Are there examples of that happening?
Unfortunately, yes. The paper mentions the tachinid fly Compsylura consonata. It was introduced multiple times to North America to control gypsy moth and browntail moth, but it's a generalist parasitoid. It attacks hundreds of species of moths and butterflies, and it's implicated in the decline of several beautiful native giant silk moths, the saturnids.
So modern biological control has to be much more careful.
Absolutely. There's now rigorous host specificity testing required before any agent is approved for release, precisely to avoid introducing generalists that could harm native biodiversity. The focus is on finding agents that only attack the target pests.
And the other long-term strategy is breeding resistant trees.
Yes, leveraging coevolutionary principles. We see that pests invading new regions often devastate tree species that have no evolutionary history with them, and therefore no natural defenses. Think of hemlock woolly adelgid wiping out eastern hemlock in North America.
Because the hemlocks there never encountered anything like it before.
Exactly. So a major goal is to find individual trees within the native population that show some natural resistance, and then breed from those individuals to develop resistant planting stock. It's a long-term game, but potentially very effective.
So we've covered Liebhold's 6 main points. As we wrap up, what are the big overriding themes looking forward? Invasives are clearly still huge.
They remain a primary driver, definitely. But the other massive factor looming over everything is, of course, climate change.
And the paper connects climate change to pest outbreaks.
Yes, there's clear evidence. The huge mountain pine beetle outbreaks in western North America over the last couple of decades are a prime example. Warmer temperatures allowed the beetles to complete their life cycle faster, synchronize their attacks, and expanded their range northward and to higher elevations into forests that historically were too cold for them.
And climate change can also stress the trees themselves, making them more vulnerable.
Right. Drought stress, heat stress, these things can weaken trees' natural defenses, making them easier targets for bark beetles especially.
But the paper also cautions against simple conclusions, right? It's not just warmer means more pests.
That's a really important nuance Liebhold raises. While warming benefits some pests, it can actually hinder others. Generalizing is difficult.
Is there an example of warming reducing an outbreak?
Yes, the larch bud moth in the European Alps. This insect had these incredibly regular, massive outbreaks roughly every 8–10 years, documented back over 1,200 years through tree ring analysis. But in the last few decades, these cycles have largely stopped.
And that's linked to climate change.
It appears so. Unprecedented warming seems to have disrupted the synchrony or the conditions necessary for those massive outbreaks to occur. So warming helped the mountain pine beetle, but apparently hurt the larch bud moth.
That makes predicting the future incredibly tricky.
It really does. And you have other uncertainties layered on top, like will the push for forest biofuels change which insects are considered pests? Will public opinion demand different management approaches? It's constantly evolving.
So if you had to boil down the core message from this deep dive into Liebhold's paper for our listeners.
I'd say it's this. Forest pest management has matured. It's moved way beyond just reacting with chemicals. It's now a complex, forward-looking, multidisciplinary field that has to anticipate and adapt to massive, human-driven changes, especially global trade and climate shifts. It requires understanding intricate ecology, like those Ali effects and spatial synchrony we talked about.
And for me, one of the most striking takeaways was that humbling realization about large-scale chemical suppression, that often it just doesn't deliver the promised results against regional outbreaks and can even be counterproductive. Prevention, strategy, and localized tactics seem much smarter.
Agreed. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given that climate change effects are so uncertain and variable, helping some pests, hindering others, how should we allocate scarce resources? Should we double down on managing the clear and present danger of biological invasions driven by trade, where the threat is more predictable? Or should we try to hedge our bets and invest more in anticipating the complex, uncertain, but potentially massive impacts of future climate shifts on pest dynamics? Where's the wisest investment?